The world's three major monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all converge on a little piece of land called Jerusalem. It means the city of peace, but in its long history, the city has seen much strife and bloodshed. Throughout the centuries, countless people have come to Jerusalem to look for God. Hello, and welcome to Mideast Journal, where we focus on the topics and trends that shape the Middle East. I'm Geerges. In today's program, we discuss the holy city of Jerusalem, its history and religious significance. Joining me is Ray Suarez. He's a senior correspondent on the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer. He also hosted and narrated a documentary which aired on PBS called Jerusalem, Center of the World. Ray, welcome to the program. You know, the story of Jerusalem starts 4,000 years ago with the patriarch Abraham leaving his homeland, which is now present-day Iraq, to what was called the Promised Land, or present-day Jerusalem. Explain how that all came about.
Well, there's a literal biblical reading and then just a historical reading. If you want to take the literal biblical reading, God told Abraham to do all this, to head west from what's now modern-day Iraq toward the eastern coast of the Mediterranean. This was a time in civilization when people were moving all over the place. I mean, the Finns came walking out of Central Asia, as did the Hungarians. Turks were headed way east and west into Anatolia and Central Asia. People were on the move, and Abraham's people were on the move. Whether God told him to go to what became Canaan or not is up to the believer, but certainly that's about the time that he did it.
But there starts kind of the history of Jerusalem, because also according to the Bible, God asked him to sacrifice his son Isaac, and at the last moment the angel stopped him. But do we know for sure where that near sacrifice was?
Well, by tradition, it's Mount Moriah, which is now the Haram al-Sharif, where the Dome of the Rock is. It's the rock that the Dome of the Rock covers. Of course, in Islamic tradition, it's Isaac's brother who was going to be sacrificed, and
Ishmael.
the angel stays his hand. So that's really, if you want to look at it that way, that's really where the Arab-Jewish conflict begins, over just how to understand that story of God's request of Abraham that in order to show his faith and dedication, he sacrificed his own son. So we start with a historical argument right away. Which son?
Now, when did Jerusalem become the center of the Jewish nation?
As what we would call a Jewish nation formed. King David, a military leader who's uniting the tribes of Israel, attacks the Jebusite city of Jerusalem and takes it over and makes it his capital of this new, still soft clay, still forming country that is now central Israel and the West Bank. And
but at the time, it was not a Jewish city.
right,
At the time that
it was held by another people who worshipped several gods but had a primary deity, and David brought his armies and monotheism to Jerusalem.
Then Solomon, King David's son, built the temple over that rock that we were just discussing.
Right.
And then that houses the Ark of the Covenant. So really, this is, for the Jewish people, the first time they have a stable building in which to worship God.
It's funny that you call it a stable building, because that was used for farming, that outcropping, that rock, as a threshing floor. And of course, animals are used in threshing to separate the grain from the chaff after harvest. David bought that threshing floor by tradition and set it aside as a holy place, but because there was so much blood on his hands, as he was a military man, he wasn't allowed to build the first temple, and that fell to Solomon, who, along with the temple, really built Jerusalem as a capital city.
Then in 586 BCE, Jerusalem is destroyed. The temple is destroyed. And this is by the Babylonians, but That's the last time we see the Ark of the Covenant.
Right.
So we don't really know what happened to it.
We'll never know. And really, if you think about something that's, 8 feet by 5 feet by 4 feet, a kind of small object, really important in history only because a people revered it so intensely, but it had precious metals on its outside. It held, well, we're not sure what it held on the inside. Tradition tells us several different things. But you think when a country is falling, when the capital city is falling, when the holding place for this precious object is destroyed, it could go anywhere. It might have been torn to pieces for the gold. It might have been carried back as part of the war booty to Babylon. It's really impossible to say.
The temple is rebuilt, and later Jerusalem comes under Roman rule. What would Jerusalem have looked like under Roman rule and the Temple Mount area?
Well, it was a Romanized Jew, appointed to be the local extended arm of Rome, King Herod, who does a lot of the improvement work on Jerusalem and rebuilds the temple yet again, rebuilds the walls of the city, and really makes it a Jewish city with heavy Roman flavor. After all, this was an outer provincial city of the Roman Empire, and so architecturally, visually, it was going to take on some of the aspects of a Roman city. But it was still very much the capital of the Jewish people.
And really the center of Jewish life.
Everybody who lived in Jewish lands would, much as a Muslim tries to go on Hajj today, would try to go to the temple to pray there, to make a sacrifice there, to offer special intercessions to God there. And even in the earliest accounts of the Gospels, you have Mary and Joseph taking the young Jesus on a trip to the temple. Well, that's what Jews of that era would have done. They would have come from as far away as the Galilee to visit the temple at specific times of the year. So it was a communication center, a cultural center, a religious center, a commercial center. It was a very, very important place in the Jewish world, which was now growing beyond the bounds of Roman Palestine. There were Jews in Asia Minor, there were Jews in Greece, there were Jews in North Africa. So this was starting to be a more far-flung world.
Well, you did mention Jesus, who's really the next major historical figure in the history of Jerusalem. Christians consider him the awaited Messiah, the incarnate God. He comes into Jerusalem at kind of the end of his 3-year ministry, and things don't go well there. He is arrested and crucified outside of the walls of Jerusalem. What happens next?
Or things go very well there, depending on your interpretation. Because Jesus very self-consciously in the account of the last week of his life, it says that all the prophecies would be fulfilled, that all the scriptures would be fulfilled. So maybe it was always going to happen that way. But yes, he is arrested, tried, executed, and then his followers believe, in the words of an angel, raised from the dead on Easter morning. Right.